And thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here. And indeed, I'm going to speak about a joint work with my friend Philippe Rigolet and the student John Weed from MIT. So the thing is, I'm going to speak about two things, two main topics today, which are, as you can see in the title, Bandit, and the other one is auction. So Bandit is a subfield of learning theory, and more specifically of reinforcement learning. The talk we saw yesterday evening, and the main idea is that you have someone, typically an algorithm, that is going to take decision and gets rewarded for this sequence of decision. And auction, well, I guess all of you knows what auction is. So I will motivate our problem, and then I will show you some theory behind the multi-arm bandit setting and how we can apply it in a real-life auction, a real-life problem, motivated by some stuff we do at Criteo. So it's not the right button. Okay. So what is the bandits? What are multi-arm bandits? So the original motivation of multi-arm bandits goes back to the 30s, where Thomson wanted to study how to do clinical trials, sequential clinical trials, and with some objectives. So what was his idea? He says, okay, let's say you are a pharmaceutical company and you have two treatments, either the red one or the blue one, and you want to find which one is the best one. Okay, so you will hire a bunch of patients, and you want to decide whether it's the red or the blue one which has the highest efficiency. So to simplify, let's just say when you give a treatment to someone, it's either cured or dead. So this is just, of course, a simplifying assumption, but just to give you some intuition. So if you want to do some basic statistics, you say, okay, let's say you have 1,000 patients. You want to compute, to do some inference. You want to know which one has the highest efficiency. The basic stuff to do is, well, I'm going to give the red pill to 500 of my patients, and the blue pill to 500 of my patients. Then I will compute, I will see how many patients survived, and I will claim that the best treatment is the one that saves most of the people. So that's a very good answer. Actually, it works really well. But the thing is, if let's say that the red pill kills everybody and the blue pills save everybody, if you do that, if you do this in the statistical perspective, you're just going to kill half of your patients. So indeed, you will know at the end that the blue pill is the best one, but you will have killed 500 people. And this is something we want to avoid when we're doing the clinical trials. So the idea of Thomson say, well, I'm not going to do clinical trials as it is right. I mean, we're using these ideas, these techniques. What I want to do is get a patient, give him a treatment, see if he survives or not. Based on this information, I will give another treatment to another patient, and so on and so forth. And my idea is to find which one is the best one between the two treatments, the red one or the blue one. But at the same time, I want to save as many patients as possible, which here what we call sometimes ethical. So that was during the 30s. And so we had this guy got quite famous for this. And then we had some theoretical study of that problem during the 50s by Lionel Robbins. And then it's, so again in 80s and 90s, some work on bandits. And then it kind of declined. Nobody really cared about bandits. Until the beginning in 2000, where this idea of multi-arm bandit had a new application. And the thing is, it's not really about clinical trials, and the application is from online auction and online advertisement displaying. So the thing is, when you go to a website, sometimes you have usually you have some ads on these websites. And oh, sorry about that. How do you, is this one? Yes. So when you go to a website, you have a banners with an ad on it. And if you as a user click on the ad, then the guy that put the ad gets rewarded. So if you go to Le Monde, for instance, that website, to lemonde.fr, and if it displays, let's simplifying, but if they say display an ad for Trois Suisses, if you click on Trois Suisses, then Le Monde gets paid. So here it's kind of a similar setting that having a clinical trial. Le Monde has two options, the red one or the blue one, and it can give the red treatment or the blue treatment to the next user that arrives, and you will get paid if the red treatment is efficient, which means that if the user click on the ad. So here, same thing, we have two different ads to display, the red one or the blue one. Le Monde wants to know which one is the best one, and he wants to do it as quickly as possible because he wants to have as many clicks as possible, because clicks are money. And that's the idea. That's the motivating idea of this talk. And this problem here of displaying the right ad on websites is actually a huge problem. Lots and lots of companies are working on it. You see why? How many actually? Because there is billions and billions of ads displayed every day, and so there is billions of dollars involved with that problem. So it's a really important one. So let's look at it, how it actually really works, and because where the auctions arrive. So when you arrive to on a website, and so here it's a picture from Le Monde from yesterday. I went on Le Monde yesterday, and I went twice on Le Monde. Okay, so I just refreshed Le Monde. So the first time I got this ad here, so for Microsoft. Because I know it's tiny, but it's for Microsoft. And then I just refreshed my browser, and I got another ad for Air France. So of course, I got these ads because in the past, I browsed on the website of Microsoft and on the websites of Le Monde, of Air France. So anyway, so I got these two ads. And here, I don't know if you know that, but if you look at those ads, can we see here? Yeah, on the top right, you have a blue arrow over here, and the same here. And if you click on it, you can see who sent you that ad. And here, for the purpose of that talk, I did that. And you can see that if you click this ad here of this was sent to me by Criteo, my own company, while that ad here was sent to me by Rocket Fuel, another company, a concurrent. So the question is, who gets to decide which ad I'm going to see? Why is this ad shown to me by Criteo, while it's here Rocket Fuel that sent me that ad? And the process of deciding which company that are advertising gets to put an ad on the website is, well, it's an auction. It is as follows. So actually, Le Monde, so that's on Le Monde, is not choosing by himself the ad he wants to display. He's not choosing between Office and what is it? Air France. I guess yeah, Air France. Anyway, so what Le Monde does is, well, he has a bunch of clients, Criteo, Rocket Fuel, and all other companies, and he contacts them directly or not. It's not really, it's irrelevant. And he say, well, I have Vianney Perché that arrived on my website, so you know him very well because he is not deleting his cookies, so you know him very well, you know what he's browsing, and he is on my website. And I have a slot for an ad, typically in the right part of the Le Monde, so I have a slot for this ad. Who wants to put an ad here? And he says, so I'm running an auction, a second price auction, and who wants to put an ad here? How much do you value the fact that you can display an ad here for him? Criteo and Rocket Fuel answer and say, okay, well, I don't know, maybe I will, Criteo said, I'm willing to pay 2 cents for this opportunity, while Rocket Fuel say, well, I'm willing to pay 1 cent. So Criteo won that auction, and they display an ad. And what Criteo paid is what we call the second price. Criteo won the opportunity to display an ad for Microsoft or anything else, but he paid only the bid of Rocket Fuel. Okay, so when you bid 2 cents, if you win the auction, if your opponent bid 1 cent, then you will pay 1 cent. You're not paying your own bid, you're paying the second bid, the second highest bid. Therefore, for some reason for that, I will explain them later on. So then let's say that Criteo won, he paid to Le Monde 1 cent, which was the bid of Rocket Fuel. Then he displayed an ad to me, which was for Microsoft. And then it's Criteo that is going to get paid by Microsoft if I click on the ad. If I don't click on the ad, Criteo is not going to get paid. And so it just wasted money by displaying an ad to me. And actually that's what happened. I did not click on that ad. So Criteo learned that I was not willing to click on the ad for Office or for Microsoft. And then when I refreshed my browser, there was another auction. So Le Monde said, well, Vianney Perché is here again. How much do you value the fact that you can display an ad and so on and so forth? Criteo said, well, probably they say, okay, I displayed an ad to him 2 seconds ago. He didn't click, so now it's worth like 0 to me. So they bid 0. Rocket Fuel probably bid 1. And they got 1 cent. They got they win the auction, and they got the opportunity to display an ad. And that's how things works. And I have to say that there are lots and lots of auctions every day. There's billions of auctions every day. So just to give you an idea of how many auctions there is in the world every day, just imagine that all those data, the data that are just sending by Le Monde saying Vianney wants, so we have an auction for Vianney. And all those data gathered around the world cannot be stored. And even Google don't know how to store that many data. Okay, so it's not like big data. It's even way more than big data. I mean, it's data are so big you cannot store them. So you have to throw away data. So because there's billions and billions every day of such auction. Anyway, so now the problem we had at hand is, well, Criteo here he wants to bid. So he wants to bid. What he wants to put an optimal bid to the auction. So their difficulty for Criteo or Rocket Fuel is the same thing, is to learn how much they should bid. And that's the first thing, because they know me. They know I'm Vianney Perché, I have this browsing history, so they know basically what I'm buying, where, and when. But the thing is, how much should they build to optimize their revenue? And this is the thing that, based on your data, the question is how can you learn the optimal strategy in those auctions? And then when they win that auction, there is another issue that arrives. Because when Criteo just say, okay, I'm going to bid 2 cents for putting an ad for Vianney, for me. The thing is, they don't have just one client. They don't have only Microsoft as a client. They also have like Cdiscount or Booking. So they can put an ad for Cdiscount or Booking or whatever. So here, from the point of view of Criteo, once they won the auction, everything is not done. They still have to decide which ad to display and how they're going to construct that ad, and so on and so forth. So there are lots and lots of decisions that must be taken by Criteo or any other companies to learn the optimal behavior to adopt in this repeated interaction. And this is where, I mean, there's a clear connection with reinforcement learning, as we saw it in last talk yesterday. Because you have repeated interaction, you take decision, based on the decision you get some reward, whether the guy click or not on your ad, and then you try to update your strategy, your policy, based on what you saw in the past. Okay, so here, just to give you an intuition, to give you some ideas, if you click still on those things here, you have lots of options. You can control the cookies that you are willing to let, you can control your cookies. And you can decide companies by companies which cookies you're going to allow or not. And this is just the list of companies that are betting when your ad is displayed. So see again, this is a really huge market. I don't know how many of them there are, but you just, I mean, it's like probably 100 or so. So see, those are all the companies. So we don't see it, but here is Criteo, where Criteo is over here. Where you have Facebook, I guess, which is over here. You have Yahoo here. So all those companies, Rocket Fuel, of course, is around here. So you have all those companies that are bidding at the same time, and it's a huge, huge, huge market. So so that was the motivation for Bandit. Another motivation for the Bandit theory is motivated by this, what we call spam filtering. So it has nothing to do with auctions, with ad displaying. It's another motivating example. So the first one was clinical trial. The second one was auction for displaying ads. The third one is spam filtering. So as you all know, when you receive an email, your spam filters decide whether it's a spam or not a spam. So it's the same thing. Each time you receive an email, it takes a decision, and it gets rewarded by 1 if he makes the right decision, and it gets rewarded by 0 if he makes the wrong decision. The right decision being, well, you classify correctly. The wrong decision being you misclassified your mail. And here's just a message if you're already bored with my talk, which I mean, are you okay with that? The thing is, so why do we call it, sometimes we don't know what this, why we call it spam. So just a thing is, like a spam, as you can see here, is actually a fake ham that is sold in UK and US. Okay, it's like a recomposed ham. And you cannot tell by the look of it whether it's good or bad for you, okay? But actually, well, the fake ham is not that good, while the good ham is better, hopefully. And so this spam filtering is to distinguish between the good and the bad ham, okay? And this has been, so that was a brand, and you have this sketch from the Monty Python, in, I don't remember, I think it's 79, where they are going to this restaurant and they are ordering stuff, and the food, and they're asking the waiter what is on the menu, and everything is based on spam. And so she's just spamming, actually, spam during the whole sketch. And this is why we are mentioning spam. Hence the name, I mean, that's where the name of spam mail that came. Okay, so this is at least something you can bring back to home if you don't understand about learning theory. So let's go back to bandit theory. How does that work? So to simplify things, we'll just look at the original setup where you have the clinical trials. You have, oops, sorry. You have two treatments, the red one and the blue one, and you're a company and you want to know whether the best one is the red one or the blue one. Each time a patient arrives, you can give him the red or the blue one, and he will die or survive depending on the efficiency of your treatment. So how does that come? So here, let's say you have the bunch of patients that arrives one after the other one. Okay, so that's a line of time. Each one is a patient. So you have the first patient that arrived. You don't know anything about your treatment. Let's say you give him the blue treatment, and you wait for quite long, maybe, or let's say it's instantaneous, and you see that the guy died. So based on this information, you know that the first guy, you got him the blue treatment and he died. You have to take another decision. So maybe you want to try the red one. So, but you only have this information. So let's say you try the red one. You wait a bit and you see that that guy survived. So now you have the third patient that arrived. Based on the information, you say maybe the red one is better than the blue one. So you try again the red one. Patient survive again. Okay, so first one, okay, maybe the red one. Here you see someone died. So now you have two options. Maybe indeed the red one is the best one, or maybe it's the blue one and you are not lucky. Maybe you killed the patient, but that was just bad luck. You know, in statistics, it's hard to make a statistic based on one sample. So here, based on this, you say, okay, clearly, sometimes the patient with the red treatment dies, and sometimes the patient with the blue treatment dies. So in order to know which one is the best, I might have to sample more the blue patient, the blue treatment. So for the next guy, you're going to take blue and see that he survived, and so on and so forth. But here, the message of that slide is, so you have a sequential treatment, okay, you take sequential decision, and you can only base your decision based on what you saw. Here, you don't know if the patient would have survived if you have given him the red treatment. You don't know that, you have no idea. Same thing here, you don't know if that patient would have survived if you had given him the blue treatment. So you're basing your decision only on the thing you saw. And this is the difficulty of the bandit literature, is you're basing all your decision on what you saw and not on what you didn't know. It seems trivial like this, but I mean, this is really important actually. And the objective is, as I said, is to save as many patients as possible. So typically here, if you put 0 for people that died and 1 to people that live, then you want to maximize the number of success, the number of ones you receive. So that thing here, you can easily see that this could be an ad. Okay, that could be the blue ad and the red ad. And being dead means that you don't have a click. Surviving means that you get a click, and you want to maximize the number of clicks. Because a click is money. So let's look at, so there is a bunch of literature on this, a bunch of ideas, and let's look at how it works. I mean, a way to solve that problem, to have an algorithm which makes sense. So let's look at what we call stochastic multi-arm bandits, which are when data are IID. So let's say that, so the setting is following, you have, as we have shown in yesterday's talk, you have k actions. Each time you have k actions. So you have k treatment you can sample from. Okay, you have the treatment red, the blue one, but you have also, I don't know, the green one. So let's say you have k treatment. And you want to sample sequentially from those treatments. And at stage t, when you have the patient t that arrived, you can give him one of those treatments. And if you give to patient t the treatment I, you will get as a reward xt of I. So I mean, I used to assume that xt of y was either 0 and 1, but this is just a simplifying assumption. I can assume that they are sub-Gaussian or actually Gaussian. That's irrelevant. Okay, being 0 and 1 is just to simplify the talk. So let's say that xt of y are IID, so that's an IID process of expectation mu high. So mu high is the probability that a patient survived, or the probability that someone click on your ad. So of course, if you know those parameters, if you knew mu high in advance, so if you know that the treatment red is better than the treatment blue, you will give the red treatment to everybody, for sure. Unless you are, I mean, anyway. So if you knew mu high in advance, you will give to anyone the best treatment. Here, the thing is, you don't know this mu high. So the question is, how can you learn which one is the best one without sacrificing, without killing too many people, or without losing too much money? So to do that, you're going to build a policy, as I showed in that slide. The policy is just based on what I see, either to choose the action red or the action blue. So you want to build such a policy that maximize your reward, your expected reward, as we saw yesterday. So you want to maximize your expected reward. So that's the kind of stuff you want to do. And the maximal reward is, I mean, in expectation is the sum of mu pt, where pt is the treatment you give to patient t. So here there is an issue with that formulation here, is that, as you can see, those mu can all be arbitrarily big or arbitrarily small. There's no constraint on mu. There's no prior on mu. Okay, we are in a non-parametric world. We have no assumption on mu at all. It can be anything. So now the thing is, if you have an algorithm that gets a lot of money, okay, let's say that's your expected money, and you say, well, after stage t, I got t rows, so I have a very good algorithm because I got 1 euros every day. Maybe it does not mean that your algorithm is really good. You get t rows. It just means that all those parameters mu I are really big, and maybe the smallest mu I is actually 1. All of them are bigger than 1. They are all equal to 2, except 1, which are equal to 1. And you're really happy of getting t rows while you could have got 2 t rows. So it's not because that number is big that you have found a good algorithm. It's not because you have a lot of money that your algorithm is good. Because you could have got even more money. And same thing, if you have, like, let's say at stage t, you have almost no money at all. Okay, you just have epsilon t. It doesn't mean that your algorithm is bad. Maybe all the other options were even worse. So having lots of money or a higher reward doesn't mean that your algorithm is good. And same way around. If your total reward is bad, it doesn't mean that your algorithm is bad. So we have to normalize that number. And there is 2 ways to normalize that number, depending if you're from the learning theory or from the learning theory community or from the CS community. And so I'm from learning theory, so I'm going to use what we call the regret. The other one is competitive ratio. So the regret is, well, you look at what you got. Okay, that's in expectation, your expected reward. And as I told you, if you knew in advance all those mu i's here, you would have given to all your patients the best treatment. And so this is the number of patients you would have solved, the expected highest number of highest expected reward you would have got had you known all those parameters. So this is what we call the regret, is the difference between those two numbers. And this is just, I mean, why we call it regret is just because it's, I mean, the literal translation, literal sense, it's just the difference between what you could have got and what you got. Okay, it's just what I could have got had I known all those parameters minus what I got. And now we are focusing on that notion of regret, and we want to minimize this thing. We want to have a regret which is as small as possible. Yeah?
Could you tell us the other criterion?
Yeah, sure. So let's, the other criterion is instead of having this, this additive normalization, okay, where you subtract from your, well, you subtract to the maximum your reward. The other one, which is the competitive ratio, is just you divide, okay? And here, typically you want this to be as small as possible. And the other one, the competitive ratio, is when you divide your cumulative pay reward by the optimal one, the maximal one, and you want this to be as close to 1 as possible. Okay? So this is called a competitive ratio. And yeah, I mean, there's some connection between them, but let's not enter into too many details. So this regret, as you can see, I can rewrite it using this formulation here, where I'm going to introduce that parameter delta I, which is just the cost of making a mistake. So the cost of making a mistake is just, oh sorry, it's just the difference between the efficiency of the best treatment and the efficiency of the treatment I. Okay, delta I is the cost of prescribing treatment I instead of prescribing treatment star, the best one. So that thing, obviously, as you can see, the regret can only increase with time, because that parameter here is positive, and those things are also positive. So you have a sum of positive numbers, so it can only increase. In the worst case, of course, it will increase linearly. So now the question is, can we find an algorithm which regret is going to increase, because we have no choice, it has to increase. Okay, it's an increasing sum of positive number, but it increases slowly, sublinearly, in square root of t, or even in log t, or even is constant. How can we do that? That's the question. And the answer is, well, the following. The most famous algorithm that does that, so here I'm going to say this is, I'm going to focus in non-asymptotic bounds, so I want precise, non-asymptotic, efficient bounds. There have been algorithms before that, but here all those results are really precise in the sense that you control everything. Okay, all those inequalities are really precise and are non-asymptotic. And while I'm here, this symbol here, smaller or equal than with a tilde below it, just means that I'm adding a constant. And a constant, in my community, a constant is a constant. A constant is 2, okay? If you have like a k it's not a constant, k it's a parameter. Or if you have, I don't know, what do I have here? Delta is not a constant. It doesn't change with time, but still it's not a constant, it's a parameter. Okay, a constant, it's 2, it's pi, it's 1 million, okay? I don't care. So maybe here I've hidden 1 million or 2, I'm not going to tell you. But that's what we call constant, universal constant, okay? It's not a parameter. So there is this algorithm which is widely famous, which is called UCB, for upper confidence bound. So the idea is the following. So I want to prescribe to my patient the best treatment, the one which has the highest efficiency. Of course, so highest efficiency is the one with the highest mean. A very good proxy for finding, for computing the mean of a random process is to look at its empirical mean. But here there is something which is really interesting in online learning, is that everything you know about statistics is incorrect. If you look at that thing here, the empirical average, and if you look at the expectation of that guy here, the expectation of the empirical average, well, you want to say that the expectation of the empirical average is equal to mu I. Okay, you want to say that, because that's the first thing you learn in statistics. When you have a process, the expectation of that process is equal to its mean. By definition, actually. But here it's incorrect. The expectation of the empirical average does not necessarily converge to the expectation, to its true expectation. Why is that? Why is that true? It's simply because, I mean, when you have the empirical average will converge to the true average when the data you get are just received as this. So you say, okay, I have 1,000 data that are IID, and the expectation of those guys, of the empirical average on those 1,000 data of course, the expectation is mu I. But here, those data are not IID, because you choose to sample from the process I based on the previous data you received. So typically, if in the past the process I was really bad, had bad behavior, when you're going to sample it less and less. And so at the end, it might be the case that the expected empirical average does not converge to the true average. It's possible. So you have to be really careful. Stated otherwise, that guy here, the empirical average, is biased. It's a biased estimator of the true mean. So now there is so if you based your policy on a non-biased estimator, well, of course, your policy is going to diverge. Okay, you're not going to converge to. You might not converge to the best one because you're looking at an unbiased estimator. So you want somehow to unbias it or to control the variance. And the way to do that is to add some error term, which is this one. So it's square root of 2 log t divided by the number of samples you have. And this is called Upper confidence bond because it's linked to Hoeffding inequality. I don't know if you know it. I mean, otherwise it's not really important. And the thing is that mu high is going to be really close to that guy of the empirical average plus the error term in orange, but not necessarily close to the empirical average. So this guy here is a very good proxy for what the empirical mean could be. It's still biased, but it's less biased. Yeah.
So this correction, is it in the case where the x, the real are bounded by 1?
So here, this correction is indeed when x is bounded by 1, or when they are sub-Gaussian with a parameter 1/4, which is more or less equivalent to being bounded by 1. Exactly. So if you know the variance of your parameter here, so it's 1. But if you have a variance sigma square, you can have a bond here that involves sigma square. You're going to put sigma square over 2. And if you don't know that variance, you can estimate it online and use here it's based on Hoeffding inequality. And if you're going to use an estimate of the variance, and you're going to use Bernstein inequality instead, and so you get sigma hat here. Okay? But here typically it's just this idea is just saying, well, with very high probability, actually with probability 1 over t to the 4th, mu I is going to be smaller than that thing. Okay? Just an upper, the fact that you have an Hoeffding bond is just because we made this assumption. If you have another type of process, you could make any upper confidence bond here. As long as you have, all the results I'm going to say are going to be true if you have exponential convergence. And so if you take this algorithm that we call UCB, well, you can show that your regret is going to scale, is going to increase, of course, because it has to increase, but not that quickly. Actually, the regret is not going to be linear; it's just going to be logarithmic. So your regret is just going to increase as log t over the delta k, the sum of log t over delta k, which is, of course, much slower than t. So it means that if you compare, if you look at, let's say you are in the clinical trials, if you could have saved all the patients, t, and you want to find out which one is the best one, you will just lose log t patients in the process, which is not that big. And if you look at this type of bond here, it depends on delta. So you might say, yeah, I want to have uniform guarantees over all the possible delta, all the possible cost of action, all the possible parameters. And if you take the maximum of that thing here, well, it more or less sums up to finding this equation, and you can show that your regret is bounded as square root of kt log t. Of course, because here, if delta goes to 0, this goes to infinity, but it's always going to be smaller than square root of kt log t. So in any case, your regret is going to increase as much as square root of t, which is way smaller than t. And if your parameters are nice enough, then it will increase as log t. So that has been, so it's a paper that's in 2002, so it's 15 years ago. And after that, there is lots and lots and dozens and even hundreds and thousands of papers on bandits following this trend of ideas. So the question you might ask is why? Because it looks pretty simple. Actually, it is pretty simple. And if you just look at the proof is I mean, it's 2 lines, so I'm just going to do it. Well, I'm going to lie in the middle, but still. So if you don't lie, it's like 4 lines. So let's look at the proof for just to give you some intuition. So we're going to look at our algorithm. Our algorithm is going to sample, to prescribe the treatment I, which is not the best one. Under which condition? Well, based on this idea, it means that the score of our treatment I is bigger than the score of the best treatment. So it just means that the score of the treatment I, which is the empirical mean plus the error term, is bigger than the score of the best one plus its error term. And now if you just take that guy here and say, well, okay, here is where I'm lying, but actually I'm not lying. The empirical average is almost equal to mu star, and that guy is almost equal to mu high. So if I take that guy on the right part, I will get delta high. Or if I take that guy here, I get delta high. This one is bigger than 1, so I can just remove it, and that one is going to be here. So I'm going to sample from I, more or less, when delta I is going to be smaller than that error from the error term. And this gives me, if you invert this equation, that the number of times you sample from process I increase as log Q over delta I square. Okay, and this is the main idea of the proof. And then everything is like 2 line. And you can show that this is actually optimal. You cannot do better than this. In some sense, I'm not going to enter into this detail. But here's the idea of that algorithm and why I do like Bandit, because you can see the setting is quite simple to explain. Okay, you have several processes, several treatment. You want to give one to the other one, so you can make any other assumption. Say, okay, what if we assume that this is possible, this is not possible, and whatever. And the proofs are basically not that difficult. It's good. The most difficult thing is to find the right algorithm. Okay, to have the good idea. It's not like taking a mathematical hammer and hammering your equation until at the end you get something which looks nice. Okay, it's just having a good intuition, which is, I mean, I think it's nice. There are lots of algorithms that improve the right convergence somehow. I'm not going to enter into the detail. If you're interested, well, you can look at the slides that are going to be online. So here, I assume the data were IID. But in real life, for instance, if you look at your spam data, the email you receive are not IID. Why is that? Because if you think again about the spam filter. So let's say you're building your spam filter. And there is an example about this. So you're building your spam filter, and what you're going to receive. So you receive an email. So the first spam was on Viagra. So you receive email saying Viagra. And it's quite easy to understand that when you have Viagra written in full letters in your mail, then this is spam. So the first spam filter say, well, if Viagra is here, then it's going to be a spam. But then the spam sender, people that are trying to sell Viagra, figure out that if they put Viagra in the I should not say Viagra when I'm recorded. I should find a better example. And so anyway, it's too late now. So yeah, those guys figure out that you don't want to put Viagra in your mail. So just put v.i.a.g.r.a. And then the spam filter say, well, this modified the distribution of data you receive, because before you never saw this kind of this string of letters with a point. And then, so it means that the data adapted itself to your own algorithm. Okay, so the data are not IID, they are adapting to your algorithm. You make a decision, and the data adapt to that decision. And then same thing. So the spam filter say, well, v.i, etc. is a spam, indicates it's a spam. So you say, okay, I'm going to change my algorithm, say this is now a spam. And then the spam sender says, okay, now we have to change things. So you just put leads, when you replace I by 1 and so on and so forth. And then you have this game between spam sender and spam filters, where each one of them is adapting to their own strategy. So at the end, we have, when you were looking at this multi-arm bandit, you still have your action. So, okay, so you still have k action, 1 to k. But the thing is, your process xit are no longer IID. Because xt plus 1, the law of xt plus 1 depends on all the past. So you cannot just say, you cannot use the last tool, which are based on on empirical process, on the study of stochastic empirical processes. So you have to be more clever. But the regret is defined as usual. You say, okay, I'm going to look at stage T. I'm going to look at what was the best decision, constant decision up to that stage, and you compare this. I mean, this is the amount of money of people you would have saved had you given to all of them the treatment I, and you compare this to what you got. And this you want to minimize. This is closely related to convex optimization. So here you have, it's more or less convex optimization, so you can use tricks for convex optimization. I'm not going to enter into these details, but you have to mix, to use random strategy. As we saw before, you want to build unbiased estimator and so on and so forth. So you can do that. So that's what we saw yesterday. He mentioned that estimator yesterday. It's important sampling estimator. So you have techniques to do that. But the main message is the last one. So if you're using this kind of algorithm, then you can show that no matter what the sequence of action is, okay, so the data you receive can be generated by an adversary, by another algorithm that is trying to screw you, okay, so you as in a spam filter, so you're trying to build a spam filter, and the spam sender are adapting to your algorithm, to your own algorithm, and no matter what your adversary is, no matter how strong it is, your regret is not going to increase linearly. You can find an algorithm so that your regret only increase as square root of t, times k log k. Scale log k. So this is a very, actually, at first time when you think about it, it's kind of weird because you made no assumption at all on the process xti, no assumption at all, and still you manage to learn which one is the best one without any assumption, and everything can change from one stage to another one. So it's not that easy to understand why it's working actually. If you think about it, you have no assumption at all on the data, and you want to do as well as the best strategy, but still it's possible. And the idea, just in a few words, is just to compensate your losses. Okay, if at some time you have some losses compared to action 1 and you have some gains, so you perform better than action 2, then you can compensate the surplus you get from action 2 to action 1. So just a matter of compensating your loss and gains. But this is the idea. At the end, the thing is, you regret only scale as square root of t, which was the same, it was exactly, this was, except for the log part, but this was exactly the rates of convergence of the optimal rates of convergence in stochastic case. So this means, actually, that if you look at it, at this last line here, it means that the adversarial world, when you make no assumption at all on all the data you can receive, and the data can even adapt to your own algorithm, this world is not more difficult than the worst stochastic case. Okay, so that was a 30 minutes course on bandit. Okay, all you need to know about bandit theory. So I've just saved you like 20 hours of my M2 courses. So let's go back to auction. So remember we had this problem here. How can we use this idea of bandit in our auction problem? So we have, so we have this auction. So Le Monde is offering a slot to Criteo or Rocket Fuel to put an ad on my web page. And the question is and the auction is second price. And the question is, how can Criteo and Rocket Fuel learn what they should bid? So, first question you might ask is, what is that second price auction? How come when you bid something, you're paying the second highest price? And the thing is, so there's this auction, we call it sometimes Vikrey auction, is a really interesting auction mechanism, because it's what we call truthful. And actually Vikrey, which invented it, got a Nobel Prize for that. So let's say how does the second price auction work? So you have a good that is sold on auction. So it's either an ad like this, but it can also be, I don't know, like a boat or whatever, or a painting. So each buyer is going to, so he has his price evaluation. So buyer I thinks that for him the good is worth V high, that's his valuation, and he puts a bid B high. Okay. So that's a secret auction, closed auction. So it's only once. You just say, okay, I'm willing to pay that much of money I'm willing to bid that much of money for that ad or for that boat. And the thing, so you gather all your bids. And the thing is, so you're going to look, the winner of the auction is going to be the guy with the highest bid, as I said before, which makes sense. Okay, typically the one which wants the good the most. So the winner is B, so B sharp. No, B sharp is what he's going to pay. So the winner is the guy with the highest bid, and he's going to pay the second highest bid. He's not going to pay his bid, but he's going to pay the second highest bid, B sharp. So why are we using this mechanism? It's because, as I said before, it's truthful. It means that your optimal strategy, no matter what your opponents are doing, no matter what you think they're doing, no matter what their valuation are, no matter anything, your optimal action, you have nothing better to do than bidding your own valuation. Okay? If you think this boat is worth $100,000, then you bid $100,000. If you think that this auction is worth 1 cent, you bid 1 cent. And nothing more, nothing less. You cannot try to be smarter than everyone else and bid just a bit lower or a bit above to maximize your revenue. It makes no sense. For the following reason. So your utility, so what you gain, your expected gain is just, well, if you win the auction, if you don't win the auction, you get 0. Okay, you had 0 before, you had 0 at the end. So your utility is if you win that auction, so if your bid is bigger than the second highest bid, you get V high minus the second highest bid. So now let's say you want to be a smartass and say, well, I'm going to bid more than my valuation. Okay, I'm going to bid, my bid is going to be bigger than my valuation. What might happen? Well, you might win the auction. Okay, B high might be bigger than B sharp. But if B sharp is bigger than V high, at the end you're going to pay more, you're going to pay something, you're going to pay more than the valuation of your good. So you're going to get a negative revenue. While if you had bid only V high, your revenue is always going to be positive, or equal to 0, because B high is V high, so you're only going to pay something when B sharp is smaller than V high. So if you're trying to overbid, the only thing that could happen is you will not have won that action with your bidding VI, your valuation. So you won that action, but you pay more than what it's worth. So you don't want to overbid. And if you bid, this should be smaller than. If you bid smaller than your valuation, if you say, okay, I'm going to try to save some money, what might happen is just you're going to lose that auction. And actually, if you think about it, since you pay the second highest price, the amount of money, if you win the auction, conditionally to the fact that you won the auction, the amount of money you're going to pay is independent of your bids. So the only thing that might happen is, instead of winning an auction and making a small surplus, you're going to lose that auction. So the optimal strategy is, it's always to bid your valuation. So in this ad displaying, if you want to display an ad, the optimal strategy is typically to bid the probability that someone click on your ad. So you're trying to learn what is the probability that, so Criteo is trying to learn what is the probability that I have on clicking on their ad. Okay? Because if they knew that, my probability is P, then they should bid P. So another guy got Maxon got another Nobel Prize because he improved the mechanism by allowing the seller to have a reserve price, which means that nothing is sold if there's no bid below the reserve price. And when it's sold, it's at least a reserve price, but that's a bit irrelevant. So let's look at our learning model. So, and we're going to place ourselves in the shoes of Criteo or Rocket Fuel. So we want to learn what is the probability that I have to click on an ad. Okay, they want to learn what is the probability that me or you guys is going to click on one ad. And to do that, well, they need some data. So they need to buy some data to learn what is the probability of clicking. So there's two ways to buy data. Either you just say, okay, well, I'm going to buy 1,000 ads and look at what it is, as we said before, and then you just compute the average. Or you can do it in a more clever way. And let's look at the model. So we have several rounds, so that's all the actions. So we have action 1, because I arrive on Le Monde the first time, then the second time, the third time, so on and so forth, like T times. So they know that I'm going to be here for T times. Okay, I'm going to click on Le Monde, I don't know, like once a day, so like 3 times a day, so there is at least 1,000 auctions. Okay, so we know that, let's say we're going to fix T to be 1,000. So that's the number of ads they can be displayed, and it's sequentially. Okay? So when ads T arrived, then each bidders, so each one of the companies we have seen before, so Criteo, Rocket Fuel, Google, Yahoo, and many more, can place bid, BT, between 0 and 1. Okay? Because that's typically the probability, they assume this is the probability of clicking. Okay? So we are Criteo. Okay, we are in the shoes of one of those companies. Let's say we are Criteo. if our bid is bigger than the highest bid of our opponent, it means that we have the highest bid, then we win this auction. Okay? And what we paid is empty. And we get to observe, let's say, a click. So you get to observe VT, the value, which is in 0 and 1, it can be even 0, it's either 0 or 1. Okay, let's say that VT is either 0 or 1, to simplify stuff. So at the end, our total utility that we got during this process is, well, we sum over all the action. So you look at all the action we have won. So when our bid was the biggest one, our bid was bigger than the second highest one. And what we got is VT, so it's 0 or 1, depending if there has been a click, minus what we paid. That's our utility, and that's the thing we want to maximize. So I'm not going to do that speech again that this thing can be arbitrarily high or arbitrarily small depending on your algorithm is good or bad. So we're just going to look at the regret to normalize that thing. So that in orange is the total amount of money we made. And in black here, it's the maximal amount of money we could have made had we always bid the same B. Okay? If we made a B, then we will have done that auction if B is bigger than the second highest bid, and this is the money we will have made, VT minus MT. And we maximize this over B. And the regret is going to be the difference between those guys. So from here, I have made no assumption on what MT and VT are, whether they are stochastic, adversarial, or whatever, or how those data are generated. So typically, VT is the good is the value of a good, is the probability that I have to click on one ad. So typically VT is whether I will click on the ad or not. And typically, these are stochastic. Okay, we can assume that the probability that I have on clicking on an ad won't change each day. Well, if I have probability, it's not true, but let's say it is. So that's the first assumption we can make. Okay, we can assume that the probability that I have to click on an ad is stationary, it's independent of time, and so the value of an ad for Criteo, which is VT, which is 0 and 1, whether I click or not, this is an IID process. Here comes the other part, MT, the second highest bid of my opponent. I can assume that this is stochastic, which means that my opponents are always going to bid the same thing. The bid is going to be constant with time. Actually, this is true. This is an assumption which makes sense because when you look at it, when you look at the data, it's almost true. So I have lots of anecdotes I want to share with you, but I don't have time. So if you are interested in this kind of stuff, go ask me at lunch. On the other side, well, we can assume that MT is not going to be stochastic because our opponents are going to adapt to our behavior and so on and so forth. So MT can be anything, and I will be able to adapt to any sequence of bids. So that's what we call adversarial. Okay, was the second idea as in the spam filtering. Anyway, in that case here, if you look at the definition of regret, when you maximize that thing with B, and MT is independent on VT, which makes sense, the optimal is always attained when B is taken equal to V, your expected value. Okay, so the regret rewrites as this. Okay, that's the difference in black. You should have bet at each time V, and you bet inside BT, and this is your regret. The difference between what you could have got at most minus what you got. The other thing we could look at is the adversarial CSC. I'm not going to speak about it today, but you have slides, so you can just look at it online. And it's when you make no assumption at all on VT either. So what are we going to do in a stochastic case? Well, the algorithm we're going to use is based on UCB. It's a variant of UCB that we call UCBid, because it's bidding on an upper confidence band. And the thing is, our bid, we would like to bid the value V. But we know, so if you look at the empirical average of success, we know that guy is biased. Okay, I told you that this is a bias estimate of V. So as before, we're going to add an error term, so that this is still biased. Okay, but it's less biased. And so omega t is the number of auction we won up to now, and this is what we're going to bid. And if we do more or less the same proof, where it's way more difficult because it's in continuous, we have a continuous action and things are more difficult, we can prove, using the same ideas, that the regret is going to increase logarithmically in log t over delta. So the question is, what is delta? Delta is the smallest interval between V and, so it's an interval between V and the smallest bid of our opponent, which is above V. Okay, so it means that we have no bids between V and V plus delta. Of course, the thing, we don't know it. You don't know V and you don't know delta in advance. And if delta so if your opponent is nice enough, then your regret is going to scale only logarithmically. But delta can be as close to 0 as he wants, if he doesn't want to be nice. And this thing we can also prove that it's never going to be bigger than square root of t. So we have an algorithm such that it behaves so you can learn the optimal value of a nullad, and it can beat this value almost optimally. The only thing it's going to lose is square root of t, a factor of square root of t, which is admissible. And if your opponent is nice enough, then it's log t over delta. So that thing, delta, I said, it can be small, but if our opponent is like playing stochastic, maybe the probability that a bid fall in that interval is going to be really small. And we can control this using some margin condition. So I'm going to spare you the details. But we can interpolate we can have some continuous interpolation depending on the strength or the badness of our opponent between this log t and this square root of t. Okay, there is parameter alpha that interpolates between those two. How much time do we have? Like it's over? Okay, so I only have 1 minute. Perfect. So that was the take-home message from the slide, is that we can interpolate between this fast rate of log delta and the slow rate of square root of t. Now, as I said, so we also have another algorithm for when the data are, we made no assumption of the data in the adversarial case. I'm not going to describe it. And same thing, we get a rate of convergence in square root of t. And all the results see the constants are exact, here it's a 4. And they are all more or less optimal up to log term, because we can show that you cannot build an algorithm which is better than this. Okay, there are always a way to screw any other algorithm. That's the summary of our results. So let's remember we had all this multi-arm bandit theory that is 15 years old now, and we adapted it to this sequential auctions. And thing is, so our action space is no longer finite, but infinite, continuous between 0 and 1. And we still got to manage to get rates of convergence as scale as square root of log t, as log t or square root of log t, which was quite surprising actually. And even if you look more in detail into those bonds, if you're used to them, you can see that there's some really, really interesting stuff going around. So I'm not going to speak about this because I don't have time. Same thing, it's online. But I would just to say that I find this very interesting. Maybe for you it's just quite interesting. Anyway, all takes are in nature. But can we use them, I mean, as it is in real life? The answer is obviously no, because there is many, many issues. Here we made lots of assumptions that are not satisfied in real life. So there's lots and lots of works to do before we can apply directly those ideas into the real life problem. And of course, if you are interested into doing that, well, please come see me and we can discuss all of these issues. And they are described after, see there is a bunch of remaining slides here, but it's just for online. So I'm just going to finish that talk with 2 announcements. There is 10-hour lectures by Tim Rovgarden from Stanford on auction, data-driven optimal auction. So this is going to be in Polytechnic, so in late September. And at Crypto, we're organizing what we call a machine learning and a reward workshop, probably on the 21st of November. And if you have any question about any of those events, please come ask me for answers. Thank you.
One or two short questions?
I'm not any specialist on this, but I was wondering, in the auction case, can you take into account some kind of internal information or privileged information? Like, for example, some auctioneers are being given information by the organizers. Is it possible to take this kind of things in account?
So actually here, that's the question, you heard it. So in this kind of, I mean, that's I want to say in real life auctions, when you're trying to say to buy a painting or a boat or a house or whatever, there is some private information that tells you what is the true value of this the goods you're trying to buy. And here you want to leverage it and see, and if you see what is the other one are buying, then it modify your bidding strategies. But here, actually, something which is really different. When you have a user that arrive, the value of for Criteo is totally different from the value, is independent of the value for Rocket Fuel. For the simple reason that Criteo has some clients. So as I say, there was Microsoft, and so Microsoft is Quantum Booking, but here is the ad for Microsoft, and Rocket Fuel has the ad for Air France. And of course, Air France is not going to ask two retargeting companies, as Criteo and Rocket Fuel, to manage their campaign. So only one company is advertising for Air France, only one of them is advertising for Microsoft. So at the end, we have this ad for Microsoft and the ad for Air France, and the probability of clicking are totally independent. Well, almost independent. So the information that Rocket Fuel has on me, whether I'm going to click on the ad for Air France, is not going to be helpful for Criteo to determine which is the probability that I have on clicking on its ad. So the private information in that case makes less sense that if you have a common value of a good, which is typically when you buy a house, and the house has some price, which is the market value of that house, and everybody has a different signal about it. And you're trying to gather this signal and try to find the optimal price of that thing. But here, we are really in a case where the good that is sold has a different value for everyone. So having private information and trying to leverage it makes sense, because but it's just using the data you have and trying to be, because here I just say that we don't gather any data on your on the user. It's just saying, well, it's always the same user with the same stochastic probability. But then actually this is not true, because my browsing history will depend, and so Criteo or Rocket Fuel has some private information about my behavior, and of course they are leveraging this to update their the probability of clicking. But it's, yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the, so here you talk about the expected regret, okay? So I was just wondering, what is the behavior of the regret pathwise? So do you have is there any control pathwise on the regret, like, well, to know if the scaling like square root t of log t is something just available in mean, or also on the full distribution of the regret?
No, you can. So those algorithms are actually just working for expectation. So it's just in mean you have this kind of regret. Sometimes it can be linear, sometimes it can be smaller. But you also have variants of those algorithms that take that into account, and you can show that you can put some probability and say, okay, I want to have some high probability version of those results. Okay, instead of having square root of t log t, you can replace some t by 1 over delta, where delta is the probability you want to control. Typically, you can do that. But you just have to modify a bit your algorithm.